We grew up believing the Greek gods were invincible, immortal beings who ruled from Mount Olympus, incapable of true death. We know the stories of Zeus, Poseidon, and Athena, sanitized myths, wrapped in gleaming marble and absolute glory. But buried deep within the forbidden Orphic texts lies a much darker truth, a story the ancients only whispered in secret, underground cults. There was a god who was hunted down, brutalized, torn limb from limb, a god whose existence was so overwhelmingly powerful, so threatening to the cosmic order, that the most powerful forces in the universe tried to erase his name from history entirely. This isn't the mythology you learned in school. This is the suppressed tragedy of the first heir of Olympus, the god they almost wiped from existence. Who was he? And why did they fear a child? To understand why a god had to be erased from existence, you first have to understand the deepest, darkest fear of the most powerful being in the universe. Zeus. When we think of Zeus, we think of the undisputed king of the cosmos. The Thunderer, the patriarch who sat on his throne at the peak of Mount Olympus, untouchable and supreme. But power, especially in the ancient world, is never truly secure, and Zeus was a king haunted by the blood on his own hands. You see, the throne of the universe carried a curse, a cycle of absolute violence. Zeus's grandfather, Uranus, was violently overthrown by his son, Cronus. Cronus, terrified of suffering the same fate, devoured his own children whole, until Zeus himself rose up, sliced his father open, and claimed the universe for himself. This wasn't just ancient history to Zeus. It was a looming, psychological terror. He knew the cosmic law better than anyone. Sons overthrow fathers. It was only a matter of time before someone, or something, came for his crown. For centuries, Zeus ruled with an iron fist and a paranoid mind. He swallowed his first wife, Metis, entirely, just to prevent a prophecy that she would bear a son greater than him. He thought he had cheated fate. He thought he had broken the cycle. But prophecies in Greek mythology are like water. They always find a crack in the stone. Deep within the mystic traditions of Orphisma, mysterious, secretive cult in ancient Greece that claimed to hold the true, unedited history of the gods there, was another prophecy. A prophecy that spoke of an ultimate heir, a child of unprecedented magical power who would not overthrow Zeus by force, but who would be chosen by Zeus to inherit the entire cosmos, a god who would wield the lightning of the sky and the dark magic of the underworld simultaneously. Zeus, driven by a complex mix of megalomania and a desperate desire to control his own succession, decided he wouldn't fight this prophecy. He would engineer it. He would create the perfect heir, a being so immensely powerful that no titan, no god, and no mortal could ever challenge him. But to create a god of that magnitude, Zeus couldn't just have a child with any goddess. He needed a bloodline of pure, ancient, and chthonic magic. He needed the power of the earth and the underworld itself. His eyes turned away from the gleaming halls of Olympus and down toward the hidden, shadowed places of the earth. He looked toward a maiden named Persephone. Now, most people know Persephone as the queen of the underworld, the wife of Hades. But before the pomegranate seeds, before the abduction into the dark, she was known simply as Corytha, Maiden. She was the daughter of Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, and she was fiercely protected. Demeter knew the lust and violence of the gods, especially Zeus. She knew that her daughter possessed a raw, untapped cosmic energy. So, Demeter did what any protected mother with divine power would do. She hid her daughter away from the eyes of the universe. She concealed Persephone in a deep, unmapped cave in the wilderness of Sicily, guarded by intertwining serpents and impenetrable wards of nature magic. It was a fortress of shadows and earth. But Zeus was not a being who understood the word no. He was the storm. And the storm was about to break into the darkest depths of the earth. The conception of the forbidden god was about to begin. The cave in Sicily was completely cut off from the light of the sun. Demeter had made sure of it. She had woven powerful enchantments into the very stone, creating a sanctuary where the golden gaze of Apollo could not pierce. At the entrance, massive, venomous serpents coiled in the darkness, their eyes glowing like embers. ready to strike down any god or mortal foolish enough to approach the hidden maiden. But they were guarding against a man. They were guarding against a god in his natural form. They were not prepared for the cunning of the Thunder King. Zeus knew that brute force would only alert Demeter and shatter the secrecy of his plan. He needed to be silent, to bypass the primal wards of the earth. Zeus shed his humanoid form, discarding the image of the bearded patriarch. His skin hardened into scales. His limbs fused and vanished. He shifted into the form of a colossal, iridescent serpent. This wasn't just a simple disguise, it was a profound transformation. The serpent is one of the oldest and most potent symbols, representing the raw, chaotic power of the earth, rebirth, and forbidden knowledge. By taking this form, Zeus tapped into a magic older than the Olympian rain, slithering silently through the damp, cold tunnels. The great serpent Isolde bypassed Demeter's serpentine guards. They recognized him not as an intruder, but as their undisputed master, the apex predator of the ancient world. Deep within the heart of the cavern, Persephone sat in the dim light, weaving a tapestry. She was entirely alone, isolated from the universe, unaware that the king of the cosmos was sliding through the shadows toward her. The Orphic hymns describe what happened next, in cryptic, haunting verses. The massive serpent approached the maiden, wrapping its muscular, scaled coils around her. In the suffocating darkness of that subterranean womb, a union took place. It was a merging of sky and deep earth, of thunder and chthonic shadow. From this terrifying and hidden encounter, a child was conceived. But this was no ordinary deity. When Persephone finally gave birth in the depths of that cave, the child that emerged was a physical manifestation of raw, terrifying power. They named him Zeus. Even as an infant, Zeus was unlike anything the universe had ever seen. He was born with tiny, twisting horns upon his mark of his primal, earthly magic. But more shockingly, the moment he opened his eyes, he possessed the ability to wield his father's ultimate weapon. The infant grasped the very thunderbolts of Zeus in his small hands, sparks of cosmic energy dancing across his fingertips. When Zeus looked upon his hidden son, he didn't feel the paranoia that had plagued him for millennia. He felt triumph. This was the one, the ultimate heir. Zeus secretly brought the infant Zeus up to Mount Olympus. Bypassing the natural order of succession, he placed the horned child upon the throne of the universe and placed the lightning bolts in his hands. "Listen to me, all you gods," Zeus supposedly declared to the empty throne room. "Behold your new king." Zeus had engineered the perfect successor, a god who could bridge the heavens and the underworld. But in his arrogance, Zeus had made a fatal miscalculation. He had kept this a secret from everyone, most importantly, from his wife Hera. And in the Greek pantheon, there is no force more destructive, more relentless, and more terrifyingly patient than the wrath of a betrayed queen. Countdown to the most brutal murder in mythological history had just begun. In the sanitized versions of Greek mythology, Hera is often painted with a single, repetitive brush, the jealous, nagging wife of a cheating husband. But to the ancient Greeks, Hera was terrifying. She was the goddess of empires, the protector of the lawful cosmic order, and the queen of the heavens. When she was crossed, she didn't just throw tantrums, she toppled dynasties. And Zeus had just committed the ultimate treason. Through her network of all-seeing eyes, perhaps the stars themselves, or the whispers of the wind era discovered the secret. She learned of the dark cave in Sicily. She learned of the serpent, and worst of all, she learned of the horned infant sitting on the throne of Olympus, playing with the master bolts of the universe. Zeus wasn't just having another affair. He was actively replacing her bloodline. He was planning to bypass her own children, Ares and Hephaestus, to hand the cosmos over to a bastard child born of the underworld. For Hera, this wasn't just an insult to her marriage. This was an existential threat to the very fabric of reality. If this child of shadow and storm were allowed to grow into his full power, her reign under the Olympian order she maintained would be obliterated. Hera knew she couldn't strike the child directly. Zeus's paranoia was at an all-time high. and his protective wards around the infant Zeus were absolute. Any god from Olympus who raised a hand against the boy would be instantly atomized by the Thunder King. She needed assassins. But who in the universe is powerful enough to assassinate a god who is completely immune to the politics of Olympus and harbors a hatred for Zeus so deep it burns like the core of a dying star? Hera turned her gaze downward, past the earth, past the underworld, down into the absolute, suffocating darkness of Tartarus. The cosmic maximum security prison, there, bound in unbreakable chains of divine metal, suffered the Titans. These were the ancient, primordial beings who had ruled the universe before Zeus and the Olympians violently overthrew them. They were the physical embodiments of raw, unchecked chaos. For eons, they had rotted in the abyss, nursing a singular, agonizing desire for revenge against the sky god who had imprisoned them. Hera, the queen of Olympus, committed an act of unimaginable high treason. She descended into the dark, bypassing her husband's eternal guards. She stood before the monstrous, towering figures of the ancient Titans and offered them a deal that would shake the foundations of existence. She wouldn't just give them a chance at revenge. She would give them the opportunity to sever Zeus's bloodline forever. She told them about the child, the secret heir, the horned infant who held the lightning. Kill the boy, she offered. Erase his existence and wound the king of the gods in a way that will bleed for eternity. The Titans, ancient and starving for the blood of their usurpers, didn't hesitate. The pact was sealed in the dark, but killing Zeus wouldn't be easy. He was a god, already possessing unimaginable strength. To murder him, the Titans couldn't just use brute force. They needed to use a tactic so disturbing, so psychologically twisted, that it remains one of the most chilling details in all of mythology. They prepared for the hunt. How do you murder a god who was born holding the lightning of the cosmos? The Titans knew that a direct, frontal assault on the infant Zeus would be suicide. Even as a child, his raw, phonic magic and his command over his father's thunderbolts made him a weapon of mass destruction. If he cried out, Zeus would instantly descend upon them with the full fury of the heavens. They would be cast back into the eternal torment of Tartarus. To kill the first heir, they had to be silent, invisible, and disarm him without him realizing he was under attack. According to the forbidden Orphic texts, the Titans employed a ritualistic disguise that is pure nightmare fuel. They took gypsum astark, bone-white chalk from the earth, and smeared it thickly across their colossal faces and bodies. Why white chalk? Historians believe it was to mask their divine, radiant auras from the protective wards of Olympus. But on a deeper, darker level, they were making themselves look like the pale, walking dead. They stripped away their identities as primordial lords of the universe and transformed themselves into nameless, faceless ghosts, silent phantoms of chalk and malice, slipping past the golden gates of Olympus while Zeus was distracted. They crept into the sacred nursery where the infant god sat alone. But the Titans didn't draw their weapons. Not yet. If they charged, the child would strike. Instead, these ancient, terrifying beings approached the horned infant holding something deeply unsettling: toys. This is where the myth takes a deeply psychological and disturbing turn. The assassins used the very innocence of the child against him. They presented him with mystical, hypnotic objects designed to captivate his divine mind. They rolled a pair of knucklebones across the marble floor. They offered him a perfectly balanced spinning top, humming with ancient magic. They held out golden apples from the farthest edges of the earth. Zeus, despite his immense power, was still a child. His curiosity overpowered his divine instinct. He lowered the thunderbolts. The sparks of cosmic energy faded from his fingertips as he reached out for the strange, fascinating objects. But the final trap, the object that would seal his doom, was a mirror. The Titans held up a brilliantly polished, mystical mirror before the young god. This wasn't an ordinary-looking glass. The Orphic texts suggest that when Zeus looked into it, he didn't just see his own reflection. He saw the entire universe. He saw the cosmos he was destined to rule, sprawling out in infinite beauty and complexity within the glass. He was completely mesmerized, hypnotized by his own divine reflection and the illusion of his future kingdom. He dropped his defenses entirely. Both of his hands reached out to touch the glass, leaving him completely exposed. The white-faced killers had their window. The trap had worked flawlessly. In a fraction of a second, the eerie silence of the nursery was shattered. The Titans discarded the toys. From beneath their cloaks, they drew ancient, jagged blades forged in the chaotic depths of the earth. Before time began, the child looked up from the mirror, the universe fading from the glass, replaced by the towering, bone-white faces of his executioners. The slaughter of the first heir had begun, and what they did to him next was so brutal, so horrifically violent, that the ancient Greeks believed it permanently cursed the entire human race. When the ancient, jagged blades of the Titans descended upon him, the infant Zeus didn't just cry and perish. He was the first heir of Olympus. He was the blood of the thunder god and the deep earth. And when he realized he was trapped by the white-faced killers, his divine survival instinct violently ignited. What happened next was not an execution. It was a desperate, chaotic, magical war inside the confines of a nursery. As the Titans lunged, the child vanished from their grasp. He didn't teleport. He tapped into the most primal, chaotic magic of his mother's chthonic bloodline. Absolute shape. Zeus began to rapidly mutate, cycling through forms of immense power and terror in a frantic attempt to break through the towering wall of his assassins. First, he burst upward as a fully grown, heavily armed warrior, his eyes crackling with the blue light of his father's lightning. He struck out, but the Titans were primordial giants. They absorbed the blows and closed the circle tighter. Seeing brute force fail, Zeus shifted again. The warrior melted into a massive, roaring lion, its mane composed of pure, golden fire. He tore at the chalk-covered flesh of the assassins, snapping his jaws at their throats. The Titans bled, their ancient ichor spilling onto the marble. But their sheer numbers and relentless malice pushed the lion back. The battle raged on. The lion dissolved into a wild, charging horse, its hooves striking like thunder. Then, he collapsed into a massive, horned serpent, his scales mirroring the form his father had taken to conceive him. He slithered furiously, trying to slip between the legs of the giants, trying to find a single crack of light to escape the ambush. But the Titans were ancient. They had fought the gods before. They were incredibly patient, and they knew that shapeshifting requires an immense, draining amount of divine energy. They just had to wait for the child to exhaust himself. Finally, backed into a corner, his energy-depleting Zeus took his final, most desperate form. With a deafening bellow that shook the foundations of the room, he transformed into a colossal, pitch-black bull. The bull was a sacred symbol of power, earth, and kingship. He lowered his massive horns, preparing for one last, apocalyptic charge to shatter the white-faced wall. But it was too late. The Titans threw themselves upon the beast. They didn't use their blades anymore. To ensure the absolute destruction of the heir, they resorted to something far more brutal, something deeply embedded in the darkest pagan rituals. The act of tearing a living sacrifice apart, limb from limb, with bare hands. The ancient texts describe the scene with chilling clarity. The towering, bone-white giants pinned the struggling, bellowing bull to the ground. Their massive hands gripped his horns, his limbs, his very flesh, and with a horrific, synchronized pull, they ripped the god of the cosmos apart. The first heir of Olympus was shattered. The child who was meant to rule the universe was reduced to broken, bleeding pieces on the floor of his own sanctuary. But for the Titans, the murder wasn't enough. They knew the resilience of the gods. To truly wipe Zeus from existence, to ensure he could never, ever return to seek vengeance, they had to do something that would horrify even the darkest corners of the underworld. They had to consume him. The tearing apart of Zeus was an act of profound violence. But what the Titans did next was an act of absolute, cosmic in ancient magic. It was believed that if you completely consumed your enemy, you didn't just destroy their body, you absorbed their essence, their power, and their very soul, trapping them forever within your own flesh. The Titans wanted the power of the first heir. They wanted the lightning and the earth magic that ran through his veins. They wanted to make sure his resurrection was a biological impossibility. In the shattered ruins of the nursery, the white-faced assassins built an unholy fire. They took the shattered remains of the young god, placed them in massive cauldrons, and boiled his divine flesh. Then, they skewered the meat and roasted it over the open flames. The stench of burning divinity rose into the air. The Titans, starving from eons of imprisonment in the pitch-black abyss of Tartarus, gorged themselves. They feasted on the body of the god who was meant to rule them. With every bite, they swallowed his cosmic potential. They believed they had won. They believed they had permanently altered the destiny of the universe. But in their ravenous, blood-soaked frenzy, they made one critical, fatal error. They missed a single piece. They had missed the heart. As the Titans feasted, a figure slipped into the blood-stained room. It wasn't Zeus. It was Athena, the goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare. Athena, who in many ancient traditions was fiercely loyal to her father, had sensed the profound disruption in the cosmic order. She arrived entirely unnoticed by the distracted, feasting giants. Moving through the shadows with absolute silence, Athena bypassed the roaring fire. Her eyes locked onto the cold stone floor, where, miraculously untouched by the butchery and the flames, lay the still-beating heart of Zeus. It was pulsing with a faint, desperate, blue light, the last remaining spark of the first heir's existence. Athena didn't hesitate. She scooped the agonizingly fragile heart into a protective golden casket and fled the nursery before the Titans could notice her presence. She raced to the highest peak of Mount Olympus, straight into the throne room of Zeus. When she presented the bloody, beating heart of his secret son to the king of the gods, the reaction was not sorrow. It was an apocalyptic, world-ending rage. Zeus finally realized what his wife, Hera, had orchestrated. He saw the ultimate betrayal. He smelled the roasted flesh of his own bloodline wafting up from the lower halls. The paranoia that had defined him was gone, replaced by a blinding, terrible clarity. Zeus didn't gather an army. He didn't consult the other gods. He simply stood up from his throne, walked to the edge of Olympus, and summoned the largest, most devastating barrage of lightning the universe had ever witnessed. He didn't just strike the Titans, he incinerated them. The sheer, concentrated heat of his master bolts hit the feasting giants with such catastrophic force that they didn't have time to scream. They were instantly vaporized, their colossal bodies, filled with the consumed flesh of the divine child, were blasted into a cloud of smoldering, gray ash that rained down upon the earth. The assassins were dead. The plot was stopped, but the damage was done. Zeus was gone, reduced to a single, beating heart. And from that smoldering ash of the Titans, raining down upon the dirt of the earth, something entirely new was about to be born. Something that would change the fate of humanity forever. The deafening roar of Zeus's lightning faded, leaving a terrifying, absolute silence across the earth. The colossal, white-faced assassins were gone. Vaporized in a microsecond of divine, apocalyptic fury, they had sought to alter the destiny of the universe. But matter in the universe cannot truly be destroyed. It only changes form. Zeus's bolts blasted the Titans into a cloud of smoldering, gray ash. As this ash drifted down from the heavens, settling upon the barren dirt like a morbid snowstorm, a chilling realization dawned upon the cosmos. This wasn't just the ash of monsters. Remember the horrific feast. The Titans had consumed the flesh, blood, and raw divine magic of the infant Zeus. Inside their bellies burned the pure essence of the first heir of Olympus. The lightning fused these opposite forces together. The ash that fell was a paradox. Half the darkest, most malevolent rebellion, the essence of ancient Titans who hated the gods. The other half, the brightest, most innocent, divine spark in the universe. The soul of the murdered, golden child of Olympus. According to Orphic cults, from this cosmic fallout, a new species arose. From this cursed and blessed dirt, mankind was born. This is the Orphic origin of humanity. It rewrites everything you thought you knew about Greek mythology. We weren't sculpted from clay by Prometheus in a peaceful garden. We were born from a divine assassination's catastrophic aftermath. This secret origin story was the core teaching of the underground Orphic religion in ancient Greece. It explained the agonizing duality of the human condition. Why do we possess such capacity for empathy, creation, and divine love? Because we carry the golden spark of Zeus within us. We literally have the blood of a murdered god in our veins. But why are we also capable of unimaginable cruelty? Why build weapons, betray our kind, harbor rebellious rage? Because our physical forms, our bones and muscles, are inherited from the Titans, ancient, resentful murderers. Every human, according to this myth, is a walking graveyard of a cosmic war. We are locked in a perpetual struggle, titanic bodies craving chaos, and divine souls yearning for the stars. Zeus looked down at this new, strange species clawing its way out of the ashes of his enemies. He saw the flicker of his murdered son in their eyes. He couldn't wipe them out, but he also knew the child himself. The true, undisputed heir was not yet fully dead. High above the ash-covered earth, Athena approached the grieving king of the gods. In her hands, encased in gold, was the faintly pulsing, rescued heart of Zeus. The physical body was gone, scattered across humanity, but the core of the god remained. Zeus took the heart. He had to rebuild his son. But how do you resurrect a god whose body has literally been eaten and turned into the human race? To achieve the impossible, Zeus would have to perform the most desperate act of magic in the history of Olympus, and it would require a human sacrifice. Zeus held the beating, luminous heart of his murdered son in his blood-stained hands. It was incredibly fragile, pulsing with a fading, desperate light. Zeus's physical form had been completely obliterated, consumed by the Titans and scattered across the earth to create humanity. To the rest of the universe, the first heir was dead. Hera had won. The bloodline was severed. But Zeus, driven by an obsessive refusal to lose his perfect successor, concocted a resurrection plan so bizarre, so dangerous, that it defied the very laws of life and death. He couldn't simply wave his hand and grow a new body for the god. The magic required a physical vessel, a living, breathing incubator that could handle the immense, volatile energy of a reincarnated cosmic entity. Zeus turned his gaze away from the goddesses of Olympus. Hera's spies were everywhere. He needed a vessel completely off the radar. He found his answer in the mortal realm. A stunningly beautiful human princess named Semele, the daughter of the king of Thebes. What Zeus did next is a terrifying display of divine manipulation. He took the fragile, beating heart of Zeus and, using ancient, forbidden magic, dissolved it into a shimmering, golden potion. He descended to the mortal world under the cover of night, seduced the young princess Semele, and secretly gave her the potion to drink. The moment the golden liquid passed her lips, the magic took root. Semele became pregnant, but she wasn't carrying a normal child. She was carrying the reincarnated soul of the first heir of Olympus. The god who was wiped from existence was growing inside her human womb. For a time, the secret was safe. Zeus visited Semele in the dark, masking his true, terrifying divine form, presenting himself only as a mortal lover. But you cannot hide the aura of a reincarnated god forever. And Hera, the queen of Olympus, never stopped watching. When Hera discovered that Zeus had not only saved the essence of the boy, but was actively growing him inside a mortal woman, her fury reached a chilling, calculated peak. She didn't send monsters this time. She used a weapon far more lethal. Humaned out, Hera disguised herself as an old, trusted nursemaid and approached the pregnant Semele with poisonous whispers. She planted a seed of paranoia. "Are you sure the father of your child is truly the king of the gods?" she asked. "If he really loved you, wouldn't he show you his true, glorious form? Make him swear an unbreakable oath to reveal his true self." The psychological warfare worked flawlessly. The next time Zeus visited, Semele begged him for a favor. Desperate to keep her happy and protect the unborn god, Zeus swore upon the river Styx an oath that even the king of the gods could not break. Semele made her demand. "Show me your true, divine form in all its glory." Zeus was horrified. He begged her to take it back. He knew exactly what would happen. But the oath was sworn. He had no choice. With profound grief, Zeus shed his mortal disguise. He didn't just glow, he manifested as the literal embodiment of the sky, the storm, and the unrestrained lightning of the cosmos. No mortal biology can withstand the raw, unfiltered presence of a supreme deity. In a blinding, agonizing flash of heat and light, Princess Semele was instantly incinerated. She burst into flames, reduced to ashes in seconds by the sheer magnitude of the god she loved. The room was a raging inferno. Semele was dead, but in the center of the flames, untouched by the devastating heat, the unborn, reincarnated child survived. The divine spark of Zeus protected the fetus from the fire. Zeus plunged his hands into the roaring flames and pulled the premature infant from the ashes of its mother. The child was far too young to survive outside the womb. So, in a final, bloody act of desperation, Zeus drew a blade, sliced open his own thigh, placed the infant deep inside his own flesh, and sewed the wound shut with golden thread. The king of the gods became the mother and the father. The god who was erased was about to be born a second time, and when he finally emerged, he would no longer be called Zeus. For months, the king of the gods walked with a heavy, agonizing limp. The sheer, terrifying reality of his situation was unprecedented in the history of the cosmos. Zeus, the hypermasculine patriarch of Olympus, the wielder of the master bolts, was carrying a child to term inside his own flesh. The golden thread that sewed his thighs shut hummed with volatile, divine energy. Inside that makeshift, bloody womb, the reincarnated soul of the first heir was fighting to survive. He was no longer just the child of the underworld. He was a terrifying amalgamation of cosmic magic. He possessed the chthonic power of Persephone, the mortal blood of the incinerated Princess Semele, and he was currently absorbing the pure, unfiltered, Olympian life force directly from the veins of Zeus himself. When the time finally came, the pain was absolute. High on Mount Olympus, far from the prying, furious eyes of Queen Hera, Zeus tore open the golden stitches. From the bloodied, torn flesh of the Thunder King, a child emerged into the light. The god who was wiped from existence, the child who had been butchered, roasted, and consumed by the Titans, drew his first breath for the second time. He was the Twiceborn, and they gave him a new name to hide his true identity from the universe: Dionysus. But Zeus knew that a simple name change wouldn't stop Hera. The queen of Olympus was relentless, and if she discovered that the infant Zeus had returned from the dead, her wrath would tear the heavens apart. The boy could not stay on Olympus. He had to be hidden deeper than ever before. Zeus summoned his most trusted son, Hermes, the messenger god, who moved faster than thought itself. He handed the bloody, twice-born infant to Hermes with strict, desperate orders. Take him to the farthest, most isolated edges of the earth, to a mythical mountain called Nysa. Leave him with the rain nymphs. But even that wasn't enough to guarantee his safety, to completely mask his cosmic signature from Hera's all-seeing gaze. Hermes and the nymphs resorted to a profound psychological disguise. They didn't just hide him in a cave. They hid him in plain sight by completely erasing his gender. The young Dionysus was raised entirely as a young girl. He wore flowing dresses, his hair was grown long and braided with ivy, and he was kept strictly within the inner quarters of the women. The god, who was destined to sit on the throne of the universe and wield the lightning, was forced to suppress every ounce of his raw, masculine, divine power just to survive. For years, the disguise worked. Hera, scanning the earth for a glowing, powerful male heir, completely overlooked the strange, beautiful, effeminate child playing amongst the nymphs on Mount Nysa. But you cannot keep a god in a cage forever, especially not a god whose soul carries the trauma of being torn limb from limb by monsters. As Dionysus grew, the suppressed, volatile magic inside him began to leak out. He wasn't just a god of the sky or the earth anymore. He was becoming something entirely new, something dangerous. He discovered the wild vine. He crushed the grapes, and he created a liquid that mirrored the chaos of his own existence: wine. But it wasn't the drink that gave him away. It was the terrifying, intoxicating energy he unleashed upon the world. The disguise was slipping. The twice-born god was stepping into the light, and Queen Hera was finally looking right at him. The moment Queen Hera realized the effeminate youth on Mount Nysa was the reincarnated soul of the first heir, her fury was absolute. The child she had ordered the Titans to butcher, the bastard who threatened her throne, had somehow cheated death. He had clawed his way back into existence through the very flesh of her husband. She couldn't send assassins this time. Dionysus was no longer a helpless infant. He was a god coming into his terrifying, chaotic power. He possessed a magic that defied the rigid, orderly laws of Olympus. So, Hera decided to destroy him from the inside out. If she couldn't tear his body apart again, she would tear his mind apart. From her throne, Hera unleashed a devastating psychological curse upon that. She struck him with pure, unadulterated madness. It wasn't just a loss of sanity, it was a violent, hallucinatory terror, designed to break his divine spirit and leave him a drooling, wandering lunatic, incapable of ever challenging her for the throne. The curse hit Dionysus like a physical blow. His mind shattered. He tore off his silken dresses, abandoned the safety of the nymphs, and fled into the wild, untamed wilderness of the ancient world. Hera watched from above, satisfied the threat was neutralized. That god was broken, but Hera made a catastrophic miscalculation. She didn't understand the anatomy of a god who had already survived the ultimate trauma. You cannot break a mind that was born from being physically ripped limb from limb. You cannot terrify a soul that has already been eaten by monsters and resurrected from ashes. Dionysus didn't succumb to the madness absorbed Italiano. He merged with it. He weaponized it. Instead of wandering as a broken victim, Dionysus turned the terrifying, chaotic insanity inside his head into a contagious, divine disease. He became the god of madness, ecstasy, and absolute liberation. He began to travel the ancient world, not as a king, but as a cult leader. Wherever he went, the rigid rules of society collapsed. He didn't build temples of marble. He held his rituals in the dark, blood-soaked forests. His followers, mostly marginalized women who felt trapped by the strict laws of ancient Greece, abandoned their homes and fled to the woods. They became the Maenads Zaravinguans. Under the intoxicating, mind-altering influence of his magic and his wine, these ordinary women gained terrifying, supernatural strength. And here is where the story of Dionysus loops back to his horrific origins in the most disturbing way possible. When the Maenads reached the peak of their frenzied worship, they didn't just sing or dance. Driven completely insane by the presence of their god, they would hunt down wild animals, bulls, lions, wolves, and they would perform the exact horrific ritual that the Titans had performed on Dionysus when he was an infant. Sparagmasos, with their bare hands, the raving women would tear the living animals apart, limb from limb, shredding flesh and bone in an ecstatic, bloody frenzy. Psychologists and mythologists look at this and see something profound and terrifying. Dionysus, the twice-born god, was subconsciously projecting his own unresolved, horrific murder onto the world. He was forcing humanity, the very species born from the ashes of his assassins, to reenact his trauma over and over again in the dark forests of the earth. He wasn't just a god of wine. He was a god of PTSD, vengeance, and raw, unfiltered terror. And he was finally ready to march back to his homeland, not to claim the throne of Olympus, but to make the mortals who doubted his divinity pay the ultimate, bloody price. Dionysus had survived assassination by the Titans. He had survived being consumed, burned, and resurrected from the flesh of Zeus. He had even survived the psychological nuke that Queen Hera had dropped on his mind. Now, possessing an army of fiercely loyal, divinely maddened women, the twice-born god turned his eyes toward the one place that owed him a debt of blood. He marched back to his birthplace. He returned to the city of Thebes. This was the city where his mortal mother, Princess Zeus, had been incinerated by the raw power of Zeus. But when Dionysus arrived at the towering gates of Thebes, he wasn't greeted as a returning prince or a glorious deity. He was greeted with absolute hostile denial. The city was now ruled by King Pentheus, a man of strict law, rigid order, and absolute logic. Pentheus was actually Dionysus's cousin, but he vehemently refused to believe the ridiculous story that his aunt Semele had slept with the king of the gods. Pentheus publicly declared that Dionysus was a fraud, a dangerous cult leader, and a charlatan bringing a corrupt, foreign sickness into his civilized city. Pentheus ordered his guards to arrest the effeminate, smiling god, and throw him into the darkest dungeon in Thebes. But you cannot put a god of chaos into a cage. The chains simply melted off Dionysus's wrists. The heavy iron doors of the prison swung open on their own. Dionysus didn't fight his way out. He casually strolled out, bringing a terrifying, psychological earthquake down upon the king who dared to deny his existence. Dionysus didn't strike Pentheus with lightning. That would be too quick, too merciful, and too much like his father, Zeus. Dionysus used his own signature weapon, mind control. With a chillingly calm demeanor, Dionysus slowly infected Pentheus's mind. He twisted the king's rigid logic into a desperate, morbid curiosity. He convinced Pentheus that the only way to truly understand this cult was to spy on the Minazo wild women of the forest wild. They performed their secret rituals in the mountains. Hypnotized and stripped of his royal dignity, King Pentheus dressed himself in women's clothing and hid high in the branches of a pine tree, overlooking the hidden clearing where the Maenads gathered. But Dionysus is the god of theater and tragic irony. He didn't just want Pentheus dead. He wanted the city of Thebes to suffer the deepest psychological trauma imaginable. With a wave of his hand, Dionysus cleared the mist from the eyes of the Maenads. He pointed up at the pine tree, but he didn't let them see their king. He cast an illusion over their maddened minds, making them believe that the figure hiding in the branches was a ferocious, roaring mountain lion. And leading this pack of divinely crazed women was none other than Agavashing, Pentheus's own mother. Driven by the terrifying, supernatural frenzy of Dionysus, the women swarmed the tree. They ripped it out of the ground by its roots. Pentheus crashed to the earth, screaming, pleading, begging his mother to recognize him. But Agave's eyes were completely glazed over with the black magic of the twice-born god. The king who denied the existence of Dionysus suffered the exact same fate that Dionysus had suffered as an infant. His own mother, backed by the raging women of the city, tore King Pentheus apart limb from limb with her bare hands. The vengeance was absolute. Thebes was broken, but Dionysus wasn't finished. He had one final debt to settle, not on Earth, but in the deepest pit of the cosmos. Dionysus had forced the mortal world to recognize his divinity through sheer, undeniable terror. But the twice-born god carried a profound, lingering grief. The mortals had paid for their doubt, but his mother, Semele, the woman who had burned to ashes so he could live, was trapped in the cold, lightless abyss of the underworld. Unlike the other Olympian gods who viewed the realm of the dead with disgust and fear, Dionysus possessed a dark advantage. He was originally Zegrus, the child conceived in the deep earth. The blood of the underworld was part of his spiritual DNA. Dionysus did the unthinkable. He descended alive into the realm of Hades. He navigated the rivers of blood and wailing souls. He bypassed the terrifying three-headed hound, Cerberus. He marched directly up to the obsidian throne of the Lord of the Dead. He didn't ask for his mother back, it demanded Italiano, through his chthonic birthright, his overwhelming power, and perhaps a bribe of the most intoxicating wine the underworld had ever seen. Dionysus achieved what almost no other being in history had ever done. He ripped a soul back from the clutches of eternal death. Dionysus guided the soul of his mother out of the abyss, restored her form, and elevated her to the status of a goddess. He had conquered death. He had conquered madness. He had conquered the mortal kings. There was only one place left to go. With his resurrected mother by his side, Dionysus ascended to the peak of Mount Olympus. When the golden gates of the heavens opened, the silence in the throne room was deafening. Queen Hera, the architect of his murder, the goddess who had sent the Titans to tear him apart, stared at the twice-born god. She saw the ashes of the monster she had hired. She saw the magic of the underworld. She saw the lightning of her husband. But most importantly, she saw that she had lost. Dionysus had grown so immensely powerful, so terrifyingly unkillable, that Hera realized further resistance would tear the universe apart. She didn't apologize, but she, in a tense, silent cosmic treaty, Hera finally accepted the presence of the bastard child she had spent a lifetime trying to destroy. Zeus the paranoid Thunder King finally had his perfect heir seated upon Mount Olympus. The cycle of fathers destroying sons was broken. The god they tried to wipe from existence, the child who was butchered and eaten, didn't just survive. He became the beating heart of ancient Greek culture. The god of theater, of wine, of liberation, and of the raw, undeniable chaos of the human soul. When you drink a glass of wine, when you lose yourself in the music, or when you feel that dark, rebellious spark within your own mind, you are feeling the echo of the first air. You are feeling the pulse of the god who fought his way back from absolute nothingness. This is the dark, suppressed truth of Dionysus that history books tried to sanitize. The story of a god forged in trauma and fire. But what do you think? Did Zeus orchestrate this entire bloody saga perfectly? Or was Dionysus simply too powerful for the universe to erase? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you want to uncover more forbidden myths and the dark history they didn't teach you in school, hit that subscribe button, like this video, and ring the bell so you never miss an episode. Until next time, remember, the oldest stories are always the darkest.